everyone, and welcome to the Family Treehouse, a podcast series brought to you by Story, where I chat with people that have a passion for genealogy, storytelling, or both. I'm your host, Heather Haunert, and today I am very excited to have our guest with us today, Stacy Hawks of Dividing Ridge Genealogy, and she's also an award-winning author, which is super exciting for me. So welcome, Stacy.
Thank you so much for having me, Heather. It's a pleasure to be here.
Super excited to chat today. So why don't you start by, just telling us a little bit about your background and how you got started in the field of, family history / storytelling, writing, because you kind of run that gamut for us today.
Sure. So as you mentioned, I am a North Carolina Society of Historians award-winning author. I also have a bachelor's of arts in history from Brevard College out of Brevard, North Carolina. And I hold an MED from Liberty University in teaching and learning. I grew up here in Appalachia, and we share and are introduced to a world of oral family history at a very young age. And I grew up hearing stories about our family history from my grandparents, my parents, and just learning more and more about the people who make up our family tree as the years went on. So I grew up to appreciate the way that these stories are passed down about loved ones that we don't really get to meet, and it's basically just running off their memory. So that's how I got started in learning to love genealogy and also history.
Yeah, that's great. To me, I think Appalachia is synonymous with oral history. You kind of hit the nail on the head there when I think of that. Why do you think storytelling is such an important part of family history? And I'm thinking, going beyond that idea of records and the names and the dates on storytelling.
Sure, absolutely. I think the importance of storytelling is because, our ancestors, they had a life. They were living, they were breathing individuals. They had goals, they had families, they had worries, they had ambitions, they had dreams when, if they were moving from one country to the next and migrating, whatever the situation might have been, it just sort of breathes life into that time period and allows us to step back and reflect on it. One of my favorite writers is Pearl S. Buck, and she wrote, "One faces one's future with one's past." And that's true. I mean, it really is true. When I first heard that, I said, yes, of course, we cannot move forward without looking back and taking something from our history and learning from our past and learning from the individuals that got us to this point, not just individually, but as a nation, as a whole. So storytelling weaves not just the fabric of history for families, but for communities and cultures as well. And within stories, we learn things like how to make the best cornbread or how to conduct ourselves when we're in mourning, because, in Appalachia, when you're mourning, there's a great deal of history that goes in behind some of those tales, like the wakes and things, various rituals, rites, even art. And Appalachia is steeped in a lot of those old wives' tales, old sayings, and recipes.
Oh. How far back does your family go in the area?
Pretty far back. I think my grandfather's side, his great grandfather was a Revolutionary War soldier. He actually lived over just across the line in Grayson County, Virginia, which is not far from us at all. And so it just sort of goes way back. And, so my grandmother's people as well, they come from this area. Of course, we've got a lot of Scots, Irish, German, English, even Native American.
I think that, having moved to a southern eastern area recently from the Midwest, I don't think people that aren't in this area really can comprehend the just history that is around you on a daily basis. It blows me away how far back it goes. How do you go about writing a story? So you want to write a story about one of your ancestors or just something that's been passed down. How do you go about writing it?
So the first thing that I do, because I'm a planner, I know there's people that do pansting and they just go with it. They just find a topic and they just run with it, which is great. But if you're doing something like a genealogy story, you're going to want to organize your thoughts. you're going to want to structure the story because structure is key. You're going to want to know the time frame you want to cover. How far do you want to go with this? Because I mean, you could go back to the very beginning of time of your tree, or you could just take it maybe a few years, maybe a section of like when the Civil War happened, and do that time period. But if you want a particular story to be about an ancestor, start with the basics: where they're born, when they died, who their family was, if there's any other documents you can locate that tell a story, like were they in the service, did they die from illness, were they around during a great, the influenza epidemic, for example, were they around during that time? Just structure yourself and make sure that what you write is as accurate as possible. And if you don't know, ask, or at least, Google.
Yeah. How long would you say, like, what typically, do you feel like you write shorter or longer stories? This is me just, ad-libbing thinking, shorter or longer typically when you write a story?
Yeah, so I typically write long stories because I'm an author, I'm a novelist. I enjoy writing long historical fiction works. But for the purpose of genealogy, I really have to trim that down. And like I said, structure and narrowing it down to a point is key, because you want to be able to say, this is the story, this is this person's individual story, and we just want to stick within these margins. But now, of course, one day I could branch it out and create a whole book about that person. But yes, it can be challenging for someone who really likes to write. It can be, because you really just you get taken with that character, with that person. Even if it is an ancestor, it can become a character, and it can become somebody that you really identify with, and that you really want to share their story. Yeah,
absolutely. Those are my favorite, the ones I like to get carried away with.
yeah. Go down the rabbit hole.
Yes, I love going down the rabbit hole. I go down that hole frequently. Do you have any resources or tools that you especially like, and would suggest for people that are kind of looking to start researching and writing their family history?
Yeah, sure. So, of course, I know that most of us are familiar with Ancestry, newspapers.com, newspaper archives, Storied Now. Story is a thing. It's absolutely amazing what that platform is doing. But yeah, so there's also the Register of Deeds office, my local Register of Deeds office. I use them quite frequently and have in the past. I use my own local community has, North Carolina, all 100 counties in North Carolina actually have what they call county history books, and they have the county seals on the books. They're called heritage books. You can get those at the library, and you can go through, and sometimes you'll find members of your family, or you'll find a story about, someone that from your family in those books. So, and, use pictures, use heirlooms, because sometimes, pictures are worth 1,000 words, and so are the things that we acquire from our ancestors or from our loved ones that have passed.
Yeah, absolutely. I think everything has a story. That's always what I think. And take a picture of it. And I love that about the North Carolina, like every county has a book. That's amazing.
Yeah, all 100 counties have a heritage book. It's black and it has the county seal on it. Ours is the Allegheny Heritage Book. My family's in that book. My grandparents' families are in that book. So it got written in the 70s, 80s. It's a very detailed history of the counties. It tells you a little bit about the agriculture, the manufacturing that was around, just different things about your own local community.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that. You touched on this a little bit a few minutes ago. I'm curious your take. So this tends to be the hot button question I ask. How do you balance the importance of accuracy with the need to write a compelling story?
Yeah, so accuracy is key. If you're writing anything historical fiction, 100% you need to be sure about, what you're writing about. So if you do have questions, like I said, ask or Google. When I wrote my first book, Dividing Ridge, it was all about creating that time limit of events and then being as accurate to the time period as I possibly could, right down to the cars, right down to the shoes, right down to the cigarettes or whatever. That meant knowing what buildings were around who my main character's family members were. So I did have to build trees from time to time,
Yeah.
be like, hey, I'll make sure I know all the players. And then, of
Yeah.
course, knowing more about the Blue Ridge Parkway and stemming off research
Mhm.
that I did from when I was in college, learning when that construction started and how the people here would have interacted with those individuals and how those individuals played a role in that particular case from my first book. And with accuracy comes clarity, and the image of that individual we begin to describe through the story. So we want to make sure that we're as clear as we can be and as accurate as we can be for our readers and really draw them in. But you know, I'd actually never met my main character. He was deceased long before he was part of the book, but his granddaughter told me,
Yeah.
because I had done so much research and because I had written him into this book, she said, you really captured him very, very well. And she was really pleased with the fact that I had captured him so completely. And the reason I was able to do that was because I got to dive into his life and experience things through the records and through his life that he got to accomplish. Same way with my family members. Whenever I dive into my tree, accuracy is 100% key.
Well, and a huge compliment to you from his, you said granddaughter?
Yes.
Yeah, that huge compliment that, you know, you could use that, describing him that's a huge compliment to you. I've heard, and I'm just curious, heard or read somewhere that when you're writing historical fiction, other authors, that it takes just as much time, if not more time, to do the research to get ready to write the book as it does to write the book.
Absolutely. It was 2 years worth of research, and then it was a year of writing, editing, and then, you know, I let it sit for about 10 years. And then I finally decided it was time to publish, time to make a move, try to do something. And KDP wasn't around at the time when I finished the book, but then by the time I got to it in 2019, KDP was a thing. So I decided now or never and get it out there. But yeah, absolutely. It
Yeah.
takes a lot of time.
Yeah. My personal favorite part is when on the show people share their a particularly memorable you know, experience or story that they have in their family. So I would love to hear, what is your favorite family story?
So my favorite family story at the moment, because I've been doing some work on my family tree, was my was my mother's great grandmother. Everyone called her Jane for years. It was Jane, and that's all we heard, Jane. And so, you know, she was married to a man named Wiley, and we kept looking for Jane. I kept looking for Jane in records over the years. I kept going back and saying, well, you know, there's absolutely nothing here on a Jane Dillard, nothing, absolutely nothing. And, you know, a few years later, I put it aside, and a few years later, I come back to it and I'm thinking, you know, maybe something's changed. Maybe some records have been updated. Maybe I can find something now. And Find a Grave came out. And I thought, I'm just going to do Find a Grave. So I did Find a Grave for my great grandfather. And right beside of him in the graveyard is not Jane, but her name is Laura. And I'm like,
Oh,
wow. Okay, this is why I can't find Jane, because Jane doesn't exist. And Jane is a nickname or something, because I knew at that point it had to be a nickname. My great grandmother's middle name is Jane. It's
Yeah.
Bessie
Yeah.
Jane. And I was like, okay, so it has to be a nickname.
Yeah.
And you know, at that point I was like, wow. But I got around to telling my mom, I'm like, look at this. This is not Jane. This is Laura. Introducing you to your great grandmother and your great grandmother. And my mom looked at me, she's like, we never knew.
Yeah.
I said, did you not? I mean, I think she died way before my mother was born. She died in 57. My mother was born in 62. So she died a few years before my mother was born. And then he died when my mom was in her teens. So my mom did get to go to his funeral. I was like, did you not ever look?
Yeah. Yeah.
She said, if I did, I don't remember, but I don't remember anybody ever calling her Laura. It was just Jane.
Yeah. Was it her middle name?
No, it was Laura Ellen Dillard. And
That is
it was the
crazy.
craziest thing, but it happens. It happens. You get people
Yes.
being called, different things for different names. Polly
Yep.
is one, Pauline,
Oh
but we call her
yeah.
Polly, and
Yep.
just a million things.
That's a good one. I've not
Yeah.
heard, we've got two totally different names.
Yeah, two totally different names, but it was really interesting to see on Find a Grave, I'll tell you that. But you just never know what you're going to run into, and it's a lot of fun, to be honest.
I totally agree. And I love that you said this is my favorite story right now, because it does change,
Yeah.
depending on what you're working on or, looking at. So that's good. Do you have what are some maybe tips, a few tips, tricks, pieces of advice or wisdom that, you can leave with our audience on just storytelling, maybe in general with your family history?
And so, I just can't reiterate enough. Never be afraid to ask for help. If you're just starting your family tree and you're uncertain about where to begin, visit your local historical society or genealogy society or your library, or reach out online to someone in the genealogy community and ask for help. There's a lot of great folks there that are willing to pitch in and help, especially on Facebook and on LinkedIn.
Yes.
A great book to consider too is by Philip Thaler. His guide titled The Genealogy Planning Research Cycle. I highly recommend to anybody just starting the research process, and it's available on Amazon. He's also on social media at your-lineage.com. So you can visit his site and find the book. And it's a great little research guide, and it's a simple read, simple, easy, and you can get it in an ebook format too. So
great. I always like having those little tips and tricks. So my goal is to link those. So I'll link to your books and site here, when we launch the podcast, and I'll also include those links that you shared. Those are great.
absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you, Stacy. You do not even know how much I appreciate your expertise and your passion. And I am just honored that you spent time with me today. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much, Heather. I really appreciate being part of the podcast, and I hope everyone finds something here that they love.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time. And I'm going to do just our quick little blurb here. Until next time, friends, embrace the power of your family's untold tales and embark on a journey of discovery. Let the ink flow and the words dance as you weave together the threads of your ancestors' lives. Start writing your family stories today and let their voices echo through the generations to come at storied.com. Have a great day, everyone. And that brings us to the end of this episode of the Family Treehouse, where we celebrate the power of storytelling and preserving our family legacies. Storied is more than just a platform for sharing stories. Dive into those historical records and newspapers, discovering the hidden gems that bring your ancestors to life. Add branches to your family tree, connecting the dots between generations. Thank you for joining us on this storytelling journey. Your stories matter, and through Storied, they have the power to resonate across time and touch the hearts of generations to come. Keep uncovering your family's history and keep the spirit of storytelling alive with Storied.